this is the topics I would like to discuss today, so that you can follow my lecture where I am. I'm going to speak a little bit about the neutrality pact and the nature of strange neutrality that existed between Japan and the Soviet Union. And then I'm going to talk about the period from Tehran to Yalta in the Soviet attempt to prolong the war from April to July 1945. And then I'm going to zero in the Potsdam Conference and the impact of atomic bomb and the Soviet entry into the war. And then I'm going to say a little bit about the Soviet military operations after Soviet entered the war. And then I want to say a few words about the conclusions, and not only conclusions of this Soviet policy towards the ending the Pacific War, but also concluding that all, wrapping up all the three lectures that I did. So today's lecture is devoted to Soviet policy, Soviet role in ending the Pacific War. And there that I'm going to talk about Soviet policy towards Japan, as well as Soviet policy towards the United States in relation to the topic of the ending the Pacific War. Now, I already talked about the importance of Soviet Union from the previous two lectures. If you have heard my lecture, that you know how important it was, that important the Soviet Union was. Soviet Union was in ending the Pacific War. First of all, I already talked about the Soviet factor in Truman's decision to drop the bomb. And then yesterday's lecture that I talked about centrality of the Soviet Union and Japan's foreign policy as well as military policy, so that you know that the Soviet Union is very important. Today, that I'm going to zero in on Soviet policy. Now, I'm change the focus first from the United States, and second, yesterday's lecture in Japan, and I'm going to change the focus to the Soviet Union and see that how the Soviet Union played a role in ending the Pacific War. And then, so that I'm going to talk about Soviet policy towards Japan, and also in Soviet, and then how the Soviet-U.S. relations are connected with that. That's what I'm going to talk about. The first, I'm not going to talk about the details of the Soviet-Japanese relationship during the Pacific War, but that a few words are necessary in a way of introduction. That Russia and Japan, as I mentioned yesterday, were arch enemies in Asia, in the Far East, since the last decade of 1890s. They are competing imperial powers in influence in Asia, in Manchuria, in China, and Korea. And then they fought a number of wars, big wars and small wars. They fought Russo-Japanese War, 1904-1905. And not only that, but there's military skirmishes, confrontations in 1938. It's called Lake Hassan. This is Changofan incident in the Korean border. And then August 1939, probably you may not know, but this is a full-fledged war was fought between the Soviet Union and Japan that lasted more than a month, and that's called the Mongolian border. And so that here the Soviet Union and Japan are arch enemies, competing for the interest in Asia, China, and Manchuria, and sometimes fought war. And then suddenly they concluded the Neutrality Pact in April 1941. And obviously that, as I mentioned yesterday's lecture, that this is not, that suddenly they became friends. Neutrality Pact was a marriage of convenience. That is, that both sides wanted to avoid two-frontal war. So that the Neutrality Pact was demanded from the strategic needs of each country to avoid the two-front war. And so that Neutrality Pact was in many ways was fated to be broken as long as either side did not require neutrality of the other side. And so that after April 1941, after the Soviet Union and Japan concluded Neutrality Pact, of course, that, as you know, Germany attacked on Soviet Union June the 22nd, 1941. What would Japan do? The Japanese government discussed what to do. And Japanese government was, in a way, I mean, requested by Germany to join the war. And Foreign Minister Matsuoka, who's the one who signed the Neutrality Pact, advocated that we should join the war with Germany against the Soviet Union, right? And but that was not the prevailing opinion. The military thought that it's premature. It's not that they had a Neutrality Pact and they are not faithful. We should be faithful to Neutrality Pact, but the Japanese government, particularly the Japanese military, thought it was still premature to attack the Soviet Union. We are going to wait until the ripe persimmon falls on the ground. And then, so the first priority for Japan is to move to the south to seek oil. And so that means that we are going to prepare for the war against the Western powers, particularly the United States. And then if Germans are victorious and Soviet Union on the verge of defeat, then we are gonna, ripe persimmon's gonna fall, and then we are going to attack the Soviet Union. So, you know, their intent to attack the Soviet Union from the very beginning, despite the Neutrality Pact. Now, and so they decided not to attack the war. For the moment, they are going to maintain the Neutrality Pact. And then in December, Japan attacked Pearl Harbor. And that was a you know, that particularly that I just go back to German attack on the Soviet Union, the Stalin. And the Soviet government was very nervous what the Japanese are going to do. And so Stalin ordered all the Far Eastern commanders not to take any provocative actions to invite the Japanese attack, right? And so Stalin maintained, you know, the Soviet Union was being attacked by the Germans, but maintained the sizable divisions in the Far East. Only when Stalin received the intelligence, very reliable intelligence from the spies that Japanese are not going to attack the Soviet Union, then the Soviet Union moved a number of divisions from the Far East to defend Moscow. And that's the reinforcement of that division for defense of Moscow was very, very important for the Soviet Union to repulse the German attack. And the first crisis was over then. And then Japan attacked Pearl Harbor on December 1940. That was a godsend for the Soviet Union because that meant Japan would be involved in the war, and there would be the possibility of Japan attacking the Soviet Union became remote. Now, but obviously, the Soviet Union and Japan concluded neutrality. They kept neutral. But this is obviously a very strange neutrality that you can see that Japan was fighting against the United States, which was a major ally of the Soviet Union, which is fighting against Germany, and which was a major ally of Japan. So that you can complicate the situation. This is a very strange neutrality, and then of course, neutrality maintaining neutrality become very precarious, right? And then this is, as I mentioned before, this neutrality was fated to be broken as long as one party's need for neutrality was no longer needed. And sure enough, even in December, shortly after Japan's attack on Pearl Harbor, Stalin had a meeting with Foreign Secretary Anthony Eden in England. And there he revealed, in fact, and Eden requested Stalin's Soviet Union's participation in the war against Japan. He says, no, we cannot do that right now because we're fighting with Germany and we cannot afford to wage two-frontal war. But in due course, we will enter the war. We participate in the war against Japan. He revealed the intention that eventually we are going to join the war, right? And so that here, both sides, Japan and the Soviet Union, despite the neutrality pact, intend to attack each other once that neutrality, strategic need of neutrality, was no longer needed. And so, but it so happened that fortunes of war moved against Japan, and the Soviet Union became more in advantageous position vis-a-vis Japan, particularly after the Battle of Stalingrad. Stalin seriously began to prepare war against Japan. For instance, after Stalingrad, he ordered the construction of major railway connecting the inland to the Far East, so that they can transport the Soviet troops and equipment to the Far East to prepare for the war against Japan. And at the Moscow Foreign Conference, and then also the subsequent Tehran Conference, Big Three. This is the first time, Big Three, that Roosevelt and Churchill and Stalin met in Tehran in October 1943. Stalin, for the first time, pledged to enter the war against Japan after German defeat. In exchange for the Allied pledge to open the second front. You know, up until this time, the United States and then Britain sort of delayed opening the second front, and the Soviet Union took the major brunt of this shouldering the onslaught of German troops. And Stalin was asking the Allies to open the front, second front, right? And for the first time, the Allied, the United States and Britain, agreed to open the second front, okay, in the following year. In return for that, Stalin pledged to enter the war against Japan. Now, this is very interesting because Stalin intended to wage war against Japan, and throughout the war, Pacific War, Stalin's intention was to secure strategic points needed to secure that the Soviet security, right? That was throughout Stalin's intention. And Stalin intended to wage war and acquire those things in the first place. But here that you can see the general pattern of the Stalin. Stalin is very skillful in diplomacy. He says, he sold, see, that Stalin's diplomatic ploy is to sell this pledge as his concession, right? To extract concessions from the Western allies. He was going to gain all the strategic points anyway, right? But as if that it was the concession to the allies, right? He pretend like, okay, that you are going to open up the second front, all right, and return, right? Will enter the war, despite the fact that he intended to enter the war to begin with. And so this is a diplomatic ploy. This is a persistent, I think, throughout the war. Okay. So that's the pattern, and then also I must also mention that already that by the 1943, 1944, Stalin secretly appointed the General Vasilevsky, very capable. Vasilevsky is a capable commander, and then selected that you are going to be the commander-in-chief in the Far Eastern Front in the war against Japan. And also he secretly ordered the general staff to make the preparations for the war. And that preparation, the study, was completed by October 1944. So that's the situation. And then 1945, Yalta conference was held, right? And again, the same pattern. Stalin was, from the very beginning, was planned to enter the war, or gain strategic point, right? But now, that promised Roosevelt, remember that 2 days ago I mentioned that for the United States successful invasion of Japan, they required Soviet participation in the war. Right? Taking advantage of this, Stalin gained concession from FDR for his pledge to enter the war against Japan. And the Roosevelt promised that if you are going to enter the war, we are going to give you all kinds of war trophies, rewards, right? And those are on the, and then what are the rewards? Rewards is that the independence outer Mongolia, which was very important. The Chinese considered outer Mongolia to be their sphere of influence. Now that we're going to give you outer Mongolia as an independent sphere of influence of the Soviet Union, and important railways, Eastern Chinese railways, other Manchurian railways, you are going to have a preeminent rights over railways, and then also various ports. Port Arthur, naval, very important naval port in China, as well as very important commercial port, Dairen. And there that you are going to have preeminent interest, influence, okay, in those places. In addition, Roosevelt promised the southern part of Sakhalin that is occupied by the Soviet, by Japanese will be returned to Japan, And also, another very important concession, the Kuril Islands that runs from Kamchatka to Hokkaido, those will be handed over to the Soviet Union. Those are very, very important strategic positions. Think about those. Why did Stalin want those points? Because those are strategic points for the security of the Soviet Union. This is the outlet to the Pacific. And it's very, very important to protect the Soviet proper to have those strategic points, right? So those are the points, strategic points that Stalin wanted. Stalin was just to plan to gain to begin with, right? But here again, diplomatic ploy, right? By promising that we are going to enter, Soviet Union would enter the war about 3 months, but after German capitulation, we are going to join the war against Japan. He managed to gain those concessions from Roosevelt, right? Now, so this is the continuing, the pattern continuing diplomatic ploy, the selling, the entry into the war against Japan to extract concessions from the United States. But here, by concluding the Yalta Secret Agreement with Truman, there are two conditions. In order for the Soviet Union to gain those concessions, first of all, the Soviet Union will have to enter the war, right? Entry into the war is a very, very important concession. Otherwise, the United States will negate, well, you didn't enter the war, you are not entitled to have those, right? So that very, very important for the Soviet Union to enter the war. To look at from the other point of view, that the Soviet Union did not want the war to be ended until they complete the preparation of the war and enter the war, right? Entering the war became a very, very important precondition to gain that Yalta trophies, right? And the second condition is this. Second condition is the Yalta Secret Agreement. Who was involved in the Yalta Secret Agreement? Of course, Roosevelt and Stalin, right? And Churchill joined later, right? How about China? China was excluded. China didn't come to Yalta, right? And those, Roosevelt and Stalin negotiating all the fate of Chinese, right? Without Chinese consultation. And obviously, the contents of some very important contents, rewards, are really flagrant violation of Chinese sovereignty, right? But Stalin wanted those things because for the security of the Soviet Union, right? And so Stalin proposed, we have to have an agreement with China. And Stalin thought that it is entering the war against Japan will be beneficial for China, and China would eventually agree to those things, right? Because they are going to save China from Japanese the war with Japan. And also, demanding this, he expected the allies, United States and Britain, to put pressure on China to force that agreement, right, on Chinese. So those two conditions were necessary in order for the Soviet Union to enter the war. Okay. And so, here, to fulfill the first condition, right, he didn't want the war to be over before Soviet Union participated in the war, and therefore it is necessary to prolong the war, right? Now, in April 1945, the Soviet Union notified the Japanese government that the Soviet government is not going to renew the Neutrality Pact once it expires. Now, Neutrality Pact had this provision. One provision said that unless that one party notifies the other 1 year before the expiration of the pact, then the pact would be automatically renewed. And therefore, April 1945 is 1 year before the Neutrality Pact was to be expired. And so that if they are not going to honor renew the Neutrality Pact, it was legally bound to notify the Japanese, right? Now, but here, the Japanese government, of course, by then the Japanese government, as you know that from yesterday's lecture, the Japanese government needed Soviet neutrality, right? Of course, the Japanese government did not like this, and the ambassador asked Molotov, does that mean that you're going to renounce the Neutrality Pact right away? He says no. Molotov says no. Neutrality Pact will be in force until it was going to be expired. That's April 1946. Right? And so, in fact, Molotov already knew that Soviet Union was going to prepare war against Japan. And so that on the cloak of this, under the cloak of neutrality, the Soviet Union transported all the troops and equipment to the Far East to prepare war against Japan. Right? And this is later on at Potsdam. Stalin said that we are going to lull the Japanese to sleep. Let the Japanese believe that they are a neutrality pact. We are going to maintain neutral. But behind this, we are going to prepare the war against. And then when the preparations are over, bam, we are going to attack the Japanese. And this is the strategy. And so the Soviet Union was just in a frantic speed transporting the troops and equipment to the Far East to prepare war against Japan. Well, you know that were the Japanese aware of this? Of course, the Japanese as intelligence officers, they collected materials, they observed how many well, actually those troops, equipment were transported at night, right, in secrecy. But you know, the Japanese are not that. The Japanese are smart too, and so Japanese intelligence. I mean, they noticed that they are transporting sizable transportation. I mean, the troops, equipment, Far East. The intelligence people warned the Japanese government, and something's up, and the Soviet Union might be preparing a war against Japan. But that intelligence was ignored. Why? Because the Japanese military were just substitute wishful thinking. That we have to remember that I mentioned yesterday. The Japanese are preparing the last-ditch defense in Kyushu against the Japanese invasion. They needed Soviet neutrality, right? And so ignore the intelligence report, and then says that we have to maintain Soviet neutrality. And this wishful thinking became a very, very important policy, and both not only civilian government but also military. And so that intelligence report, very important, valuable intelligence report, did not play much part in Japanese. In fact, there's a conflict between the intelligence people and strategic people in the military. and of course, strategic people had more, more power. Okay, in the Japanese military. So that's the way. Just aside, just a little bit information. Now, so in April 1945, the Soviet Union notified the Japanese government that they are not going to renew the Neutrality Pact. And by then, the Soviet government's preparing war against Japan. There's one big problem. Big problem is that when they are planning to wage war against Japan in August, right? By then, the weather is the most favorable, and by August, all the transportation of troops and equipment will be completed. And so this is the time to attack Japan, right? So August, that's before Neutrality Pact will expire. So the problem is, well, how to attack the Soviet Union? How to attack Japan in violation of Neutrality Pact, right? Because obviously, Soviet attack on Japan before Neutrality Pact was expired, this is a violation of Neutrality Pact, right? Well, you might say, well, to hell with all those treaties of Soviet communists who never abide by all those neutrality. But that's not true. The Soviet Union took all those neutrality pacts and agreements very seriously. And particularly, think about it. How was the Soviet Union attacked by Germany? Right? In violation of non-aggression pact. Right? And Stalin didn't want. And Stalin did not want that kind of precedent. I mean, the compared with a Nazi attack and then Soviet attack on Japan. Right? And particularly, well, the Soviet citizens fight the war against Nazi Germany because they were attacked. But there's a neutrality pact, okay, in Japan. So therefore, they worried. So how are we going to attack the Soviet Union, attack Japan in violation of the neutrality pact? And then the solution was this, found in this Stalin-Hopkins meeting here. Now, by then, Harry Hopkins, this is Truman's advisor, went to Moscow to meet Stalin. By then, you know that there's some conflict between the United States and the Soviet Union over Poland, and also abrogation, the United States unilateral abrogation of the Lend-Lease, and so on. There's some all kinds of problem mounting. So that Truman sent Harry Hopkins to Moscow, and then Hopkins met with Stalin. The Far Eastern issue was also a very important issue to Harry Hopkins, and Stalin again, following the usual pattern, Stalin promised to enter the war against Japan 3 months, roughly 3 months after German defeat. Right? And then there, Hopkins made a very important promise to Stalin. And he said, we are going to discuss the issue. We're going to discuss the issue of ultimatum against Japan at the forthcoming Potsdam Conference. Right? This issue of ultimatum will be on agenda of Potsdam Conference. And there, of course, we are going to discuss this issue together with you. right? In other words, Soviet Union was invited to participate in a deliberation of joint ultimatum. Here is a good solution, because Soviet Union will be invited by the allies, United States and Britain, to join the war against Japan. That obligation to the allies would take more weight, take precedent over Soviet agreement with Neutrality Pact, right? So there's a good excuse, right? So that's a good solution. How to wage war against Japan in violation of Neutrality Pact. You have to remember, therefore, that Stalin's joining that deliberation of Potsdam ultimatum, right? And Stalin appending his signature on the joint ultimatum is a very, very crucial issue for Soviet Union forthcoming Potsdam Declaration, Potsdam Conference. This would, of course, that, as I said, this is justify the Soviet entrance into the war against Japan in violation of Neutrality Pact. Okay, and so.
Sorry, what's the date of this meeting?
Pardon me?
What's the date?
Date was May 1945, right? And then June, when, of course, as I mentioned yesterday, when the Soviet Union was preparing a war against Japan, Japanese side, Japan needed Soviet neutrality so badly for various reasons, for military reasons, right? Because they're preparing the war against the United States in the Kyushu, right? They are sending all those elite troops from Manchuria to thinning that forces, right, from Manchuria and China, right? And so, so that neutrality of Soviet Union is very important. And also, as I mentioned before, neutrality of Soviet Union, I mean, is very, very important because Soviet Union is the remaining big power through which that Japan to seek the termination of the war. So, Japan, at this point, and foolishly, I think, in my opinion, and clumsily, trying to seek the renewal of neutrality pact with the Soviet Union. First, an official negotiation between former Prime Minister and Foreign Minister Hirohito and American Ambassador Malik. Okay, Hirohito approached Malik, says that we would like to have a negotiation with you and to explore the possibility of renewing the neutrality pact again, or neutrality or non-aggression pact, right? So the unofficial negotiation on the initiative of Japanese side began, right? The Japan fell into the trap of the Soviet Union because this is Molotov instructed Malik, right, to prolong the negotiations. Don't accept any proposals. And if you have any proposals, trying to see clarifications, but do not reject any attempts of the Soviet of the Japanese government for negotiation, right? And if there are anything communications, right? And Molotov instructed Malik to send that communications through diplomatic pouch. He could have sent telegram, right? He could send anything, right? But diplomatic pouch, the slowest form of diplomacy, right? Well, as you can guess, why is Molotov sending that kind of instruction? Of course, to prolong the negotiations, right? Prolong the negotiations so that the Soviet Union can earn some time, so that prepare for the war against Japan. So that the Japanese really, Japan fell into Soviet trap to prolong the war. That was a very, very serious blunder on the part of Japan, because Japan needed the Soviet neutrality. While still the Hirohito was negotiating with Malik, up until this time, the Soviet preparation for war against Japan was very secret. Only a few people knew. Stalin, Molotov, and some military planners knew. But now, in June 26 and 27, they held in large Politburo meeting, right? And the Politburo, the highest decision-making body, Communist Party, decided to go to war against Japan. It's no longer secret to a few people that this became the official, and then the Politburo approved of military operation, military strategy. The military plan was to attack Japanese forces in Manchuria from 3 directions. From Mongolia, the Trans-Baikal Front, and the first Far Eastern Front, the second Far Eastern Front, the pincer movement, all right? And so here, 3 directions. They formed 3 fronts, right? And Stalin ordered the commanders of 3 fronts to make preparations for the war. So, in other words, this gigantic Soviet war machine was now set in motion, right? This is no longer secret to a few people. This became a state policy, right? That's one very interesting thing, is that in the Politburo, there's one issue that did not make a determination, is that whether or not the Soviet Union will wage the war, what are they going to do with the Hokkaido operation? Hokkaido is beyond the Yalta confinement, right? But I wish that I had a map here, but you know that there's a Sakhalin there, the Kuriel. Let's see. Maybe I should write a map here. Japan is here, all right? And the Sakhalin is here, and the Kuriles going like the Kuril Islands, just like this, right? Of course, the Soviet Union had control. In order to control the outlet here, the Soviet Union needed the control of Hokkaido, right? But Hokkaido was beyond the Yalta agreement. And so whether or not they are going to, the Politburo were divided on this issue, right? And whether or not they should wage the launch and operation against Hokkaido was left undecided at this point. This becomes a very important issue after the Soviet Union entered the war. Okay. And then it is only after the Soviet Union decided to wage war against Japan, then the Japanese government decided to seek Moscow's mediation to terminate the war. How stupid is this? And this is, nonetheless, I mean, this is, Japanese strategic thinking was something was really lacking here. So Japan decided to send Emperor's special envoy, Prince Konoe, to Moscow to terminate the war. I mean, this is the background of famous Togo's telegram to Sato on July 12th, right? Ambassador Sato was opposed from the very beginning. This is really stupid mistake. But Togo and the Japanese government, of course, desperate move. This is the reason, of course, is the importance of terminating a war by preserving the Kokutai and the Soviet Union's the last hope, right? And so therefore the Japan decided to send Emperor's envoy Prince Konoe to Moscow to terminate the war. And then this is the background of Togo's July 12 telegram. They saw the Japanese emperor August wish to terminate the war for the sake of world peace, right? But if the Allies insist on unconditional surrender, then the Japanese government have no choice but to fight to the end. This is famous. And then the importance of Togo's telegram was discussed in the first lecture, okay? And then importance was discussed in yesterday's lecture as well. And so Sato requested the meeting with Molotov so that to receive Moscow's answer for Japanese request. But Molotov refused to see him and told his deputy, Dozovsky, tell the Japanese that this is, it's unclear. To whom this telegram was addressed is not clear. Therefore, seek more clarification. Why is he doing it? Obviously, to earn more time, prolong the war, right? And so he took off to Potsdam without meeting Sato. Sato kept waiting for for Moscow's answer, right? But this, because of telegram, Stalin became aware that Japan was on the verge of collapse. Japan was verge, they were willing to end the war. He became nervous. The war might be over soon, before the Soviet Union entered the war. So before, or on the way to Potsdam, Stalin sent a telegram to General Marshal Vasilevsky, the commander of Far Eastern Front, asking me, is it possible to change the date of the attack? The date of attack was determined as set as August 11th, right? And he asked Vasilevsky, is it possible to move up the date of attack by 10 days so that we can join the war before the war was over? And Vasilevsky said, it's not a good idea because it's still in a process of preparation. You have to understand that this is a well prepared, well executed plan. We are going to attack. This is the attack the Japanese forces. This Manchurian operation was about 4 times as big as France, right? And they are going to have a surprise attack. We are not going to let the Japanese know that we are going to attack. Surprise attack on all 3 fronts on the same day. At the same time, this is their plan, right? And so we are not ready yet. And so Stalin says, okay, fine. Then we're going to keep it that way for the time being. Okay. Before Stalin and Molotov left for Potsdam, they had negotiated with the Chinese foreign minister, Chiang Kai-shek's foreign minister, TV Sung, arrived in Moscow on July the 1st. And then the Chinese-Soviet negotiations began, and Soviet Union got the second agreement condition, okay, under which that Soviet Union entered the war, right? You have to secure agreement with the Chinese. Well, despite the expectation of the Soviet or Stalin that Soviet participation in the war would aid, okay, Chinese would be very grateful, right? And lo and behold, the Chinese are very adamant. Chinese are adamant because there's a violation of our sovereignty. We are not going to abide by this the independence of Outer Mongolia. We are not going to give you preeminent rights on our railways and ports. We insist on our sovereignty. And the negotiations are very, very tough. And Chinese will not agree. And so finally, the negotiations are broken off. Negotiations went nowhere, right? Negotiations are broken off. And so, Molotov and then Stalin took off to left for Potsdam. So the Potsdam conference began. Now I have to make clear again the two objectives why Stalin came to Potsdam for the sake of on the issue of in the Far East. Stalin's objective was to participate and join the joint ultimatum against Japan, so that he could wage war against Japan in violation of the Neutrality Pact. And also he obtained Allied cooperation to pressure Chinese. Chinese are intransigent, right? And put the United States pressure on China to come to an agreement. So those are the two objectives. And so that Stalin also followed the pattern, right? In order to attain those objectives, Stalin attempted to sell his pledge to enter the war against Japan. Right? It worked. It worked in Tehran conference. It worked in Yalta conference. What do you think? Do you think it's going to work? Okay, in my first lecture, right, already discussed this. The United States acquired a very important weapon, the atomic bomb. United States did not need the Soviet participation. In fact, Truman, because of the atomic bomb, did not want the Soviet participation. The name, the rule of game have changed. Okay, so this is the situation. But Truman and Stalin continued to believe that this is to pledge to enter the war would still gain some advantage for him. Stalin met Truman on the July 17th and 18th. On July 17th, he said he pledged to enter the war against Japan. He said twice, around August 15th or on August 15th, right? And he expected that he would be rewarded, right? By Truman's acceptance, and he expected Truman to put pressure on Chinese, at least agree to put pressure on the Chinese for the agreement. Truman was indifferent. Okay, we will abide by the Yalta agreement, But beyond that, we are not going to go anywhere. In fact, he demanded that Freeport stayed in Darien. So he was not very cooperative about Stalin. First disappointment. And Stalin gave the second trump card that, okay, I tell you, reveal that Japan, he revealed to Truman that we got the secret request from the Japanese government to mediate for peace, right? He was really giving really top secret information to Truman. Well, this is, of course, as I mentioned before, Truman knew because he had this magic intercept, right? And he knew that the contents of the Togo's telegram already. Whether or not Stalin knew that Truman knew, we don't know. But if Stalin knew that Truman knew, then revealing top secret is not really top secret, right? But anyway, so here, so Stalin asked Truman, so what do you want me to do? And so Stalin says, what are you planning to do? And Stalin said, well, you know, we are going to lull the Japanese to sleep. This is a famous term that he used. We're gonna ask the Japanese to clarify to whom that telegram was intended. Again, earning time, okay? Buying time, prolonged the war. And Truman said, okay, that's a good idea. Stalin wanted to prolong the war long enough so that the Soviet Union could join the war. And Truman also, at this point, wanted to prolong the war. Truman did not want the Soviet Union to accept the mediation and end the war right away. So Truman also wanted to prolong the war so that he could drop the atomic bomb. Right? The outcome of the nuclear test was not clear yet. Now, Truman received General Grove's detailed report on the first successful atomic detonation, atomic bomb, on July 16th. And as I said, and Tuesday lecture, Churchill and Truman discussed how to reveal the information of the atomic bomb to Stalin. And they decided, we are not going to reveal the whole thing, because if we say this is the atomic bomb, what's going to happen? Stalin will say, well, we are allies. I don't want to join. I want to join the atomic bomb. So we don't want to reveal. And besides that, we don't want to reveal the nature of the atomic bomb. So on the July the 24th, as I already mentioned, during the intermission, Truman approached Stalin very nonchalantly. Says, you know, I want you to know this information that we possessed. We succeeded in possessing a weapon of destructive capacity. Everybody's watching how Stalin was going to react, and Stalin nonchalantly says, well, that's very good news. I hope that you would make the best use of a weapon. And Truman thought, was in the impression that Stalin did not know the importance of this information, and lots of American observers who watched the scene thought that Stalin did not know. Well, Stalin knew exactly what Truman was talking about, because Stalin had a secret spy in Manhattan Project, right? And so here, this is the first suspicion. Truman did not tell me the whole truth about the atomic bomb. Provokes some suspicion. Something is going on. And so, Truman's half-truth about atomic bomb provoked Stalin's suspicion. But more important surprise was waiting for him. As I explained on Tuesday lecture, the US policy, Truman completely excluded Stalin and Soviet representative from deliberation of the joint ultimatum to the Japanese. Remember, this is a big thing. This is the major purpose as far as Stalin is concerned. Right? And he was totally excluded. Right? He was totally surprised. Even Potsdam Proclamation ultimatum was given to the press even before it was given to the Soviet government. Right? And it was given to the Soviet government, of course. They were flabbergasted. We're totally out with it. And Molotov requested the issuance of this ultimatum be delayed so that we can also participate in the ultimatum. In fact, now we know that Soviet government, Soviet representative, very hastily wrote the draft of joint declaration, in which they said that Allied powers now issue the joint ultimatum to end the war. Right? But that became, of course, rejected. The Burns completely rejected because, well, it's too late because the ultimatum was given to the press, and then, of course, that it's just due about in 3 hours, it's going to be announced. And the Soviet Union is completely out with it, and therefore the Soviet draft was totally to nothing, and it was sent to the archives. And then what did the Soviet government do? Okay, then on July 29th, in the Potsdam Conference, Stalin requested, then probably the best thing for you guys to do is to invite me to append my signature to the ultimatum. What did Truman say? No way. You are not at war with Japan. If you want to join the war, you can join the war, and then gave flimsy legal explanations. I'm not going to go into details, but that's Moscow Declaration, to which Japan was not a party, and the 2 articles of United Nations charters that nobody has ratified yet, and Japan had nothing to do with it. If you want to join the war, you can do it. So those are the Truman rejected. Now, it became clear to Stalin. The United States was now determined to end the war without the Soviet Union, before the Soviet Union entered the war. Here at this point, the race between Stalin and Truman, which one side would force Japanese surrender, has begun in earnest. Right? What's going to happen? It's the Soviet Union. It's a race between Soviet entry into the war or U.S. dropping atomic bomb and force Japan surrender, as Truman wished. Now, how did Stalin react to the Potsdam ultimatum then? Well, actually, Stalin's failure to add the signature actually helped him. Stalin's game plan is that, okay, we are going to have a signature, we append the signature, the joint ultimatum, we are going to issue the joint ultimatum, and this become a declaration of war, right? Well, that was aborted. That was sabotaged by Truman, but this worked well for him. Unexpected, because the Japanese still continue to rely on Soviet mediation, right? And Japanese noticed that the Stalin did not sign the Potsdam Declaration, and so Japanese still continue to rely on the Moscow's mediation. But July 29th, after that, he learned about the Potsdam Declaration was issued without Soviet participation. He officially appointed Vasilevsky as commander of the Far Eastern Front. Up until then, Vasilevsky was a Far Eastern pseudonym, right? And officially formed 3 fronts. And they officially ordered the 3 fronts to make final preparation for war against Japan. Now, in Soviet archives, it's very, very difficult to get in. We don't know. Nothing. I mean, very, very little is revealed and what really happened in the decision making. But there's one very interesting document that I'm going to introduce here. Then I'm going to speculate on the basis of this document, how that the Soviet decision making was made. This the Marshal Vasilevsky sent a telegram to Stalin August 3rd. Right? What did this telegram say? First, the Trans-Baikal Front is ready. It's about to complete the deployment of troops and equipment, 50 to 60 kilometers from the border by August 5th. And he says, according to your instructions. According to your instructions. Right? And then he says, now, the minimum 5 days will be required for preparation for attack in Trans-Baikal Front. And so the optimal time to attack is August 9th to 10th. That is moving ahead from August 11th date, right? And then he added, after the initial attack of the Trans-Baikal Front, the first and 2 other fronts, first Far Eastern Front, the second Far Eastern Front, will attack on the same day at the same time. Now, that's his plan was that 2-stage war, right? First attack Trans-Baikal Front, and the first, and then after that, the two fronts would attack. And then he said, he requested the further information on the precise date of attack on the first and the second Far Eastern Front, and further, and I quote, the political and diplomatic information connected with this attack. It's a very, very interesting telegram. Now, my interpretation of this is this. Obviously, this telegram was in response to Stalin's order further, because according to your instructions, right? So this instruction must have been issued from Potsdam after he learned of US issuing ultimatum. And then this order most likely connected with the US unilateral issuance of Potsdam ultimatum. He was just very eager to attack. But the Staff headquarters rejected this two-stage attack because it's dangerous. They have been preparing for the attack. Simultaneous surprise attack. What happens? The Trans-Baikal, Baikal front attack the Japanese forces, right? Then Japanese might counterattack on other fronts, right? So they didn't want that, and so that they maintained the original date of August 11th as the first attack on all three fronts on the same day at the same time. And then what happened? August 6th, the United States dropped the first atomic bomb. Okay, 8:15 a.m. Japan time. That's about 0.15 minutes after midnight. What was Soviet reaction? Pravda did not report on this on August 6th. Pravda, that official party newspaper. Pravda did not cover the atomic bomb until August 7th. When it covered, it was tucked in a lower column on page 4, as if there's nothing very important. Now, what does that indicate? Indicate that something they didn't like, right? And Molotov came to see TV soon on August 7th. He was very depressed. And he told TV soon that the Japanese are on the verge of surrender. Again, give you the most very interesting document that I discovered in Soviet archives. Here, this is Stalin's appointment log, right? Stalin arrived. Probably you don't read Russian, but here this is the August 5th, 1945. He saw Molotov, Mikoyan, and Beria, and so on, right? He just arrived in Moscow. He came back from Moscow to Moscow on August 5th, and immediately resumed the very, very active, intensive activities, right? And next appointment log, August 7th, 1945, and he was Molotov, Petrov, Pavlov, Rozovsky, and so on, right? What happened? His appointment on August 6th. Well, at least he did not meet anybody in the Kremlin. It is possible that he resumed activities in his dacha, summer place. We don't know because we don't have a log. But at least from this, it is possible to speculate he was very depressed. He was depressed. He did not expect the United States to drop the bomb so early, so quickly. It is possible to speculate the game is over. The United States managed to drop the bomb. We lost the game. Japan would surrender, right? But something happened. On August 7th, Ambassador Sato requested the urgent meeting with Molotov, who just came back from Potsdam, right? So that the Japanese government still wants to find out what Moscow's answer to our pending request for Emperor's envoy to terminate the war. Something flickered in his mind. Stalin says, pin, pin, pin. The light went up. Says, the game is not over yet. Game is not over yet. He left on action on August 7th. And in fact, this is the first Japanese signal reaction to atomic bomb. Right? At least Hiroshima bomb did not lead Japan to surrender. And so he leapt into action, immediately ordered to move up the date of attack by 48 hours, from August 11th to midnight or August 9th. Clearly, the atomic bomb led Stalin to order the attack, right? Stalin also ordered Molotov to receive Sato. Initially, it was set, it was 6 o'clock, but it was later changed to 5 o'clock. It's very important to remember this change of date, change of time, right? August. And so he ordered Molotov to receive Sato at 5 o'clock on August 8th to read the Soviet declaration of war. And then he arranged in a hasty meeting, arranged a meeting with the Chinese. Chinese arrived on August 7th, right? And then without taking time to rest, they said, you come to the meeting at 9 o'clock, right? So that he was interested and come to agreement with the Chinese immediately before he entered the war. And so Sato arrived at Molotov's office 5 o'clock on August 8th. As you know, this is what the Japanese are waiting for this moment since Togo's telegram on July 17th. It's eagerly waiting for them. What Moscow is going to say. It's going to receive Konoe's mission to terminate the war or not, right? And then the Molotov said, sit down, I have very important information, as I mentioned yesterday. Molotov read the Soviet declaration of war. Okay. He said, the Allied, United States and Britain, asked us to join the joint declaration, which they did not. Of course, this is a lie, right? And then the Japanese government rejected this ultimatum, which is not necessarily true. Japanese never requested, but Truman said they rejected, and therefore Molotov said, yeah, we take Truman's word. Okay, Japan rejected. Therefore, to terminate the war, the Soviet Union would find itself in a state of war at midnight of August 9th. Right? That was shortly after 5 o'clock. Midnight of August 9th in the Far Eastern time was 6 o'clock, okay, and Moscow time. And so less than 1 hour, and the Soviet tanks and Soviet airplanes crossed the border to attack Japanese forces in Manchuria. And so here, the Soviet Union managed to join the war in the nick of time. Beat Truman, right? And as I mentioned before, Truman was kind of disappointed because he held the shortest news conference, right? And Burns issued a statement making the point that we did not ask the Soviet Union to join the joint ultimatum. And so the Soviet managed to join the war. And once the Soviet Union joined the war, Soviet military objective was aimed to capture what was promised in Yalta and sometimes beyond. As quickly as possible, Soviet tanks, Soviet moved very closely, right, and intended to capture all those, Port Arthur and Darien and those places. And as I mentioned yesterday, here the Soviet, as far as the Japanese decision to surrender is concerned, Soviet entry into the war was more powerful, more important than atomic bombs, 2 atomic bombs concerned. And how about the Chinese, agreement with Chinese? Well, Stalin gambled, entered the war without Chinese agreement with Chinese. This is a violation, Yalta. But he gambled, says, I entered the war, we entered the war, nobody's gonna protest. That was a violation, Yalta agreement. In fact, the Chinese, okay, once the Soviet troops were coming very deep into China, Chinese became very afraid that the Soviet troops, Soviet influence might establish some kind of communist regime in Manchuria. And so they quickly came around to make an agreement with the Soviet Union. But it was only 3 hours after Japan declared, Japan submitted the surrender. Now, I don't want to spend very much time here, but I would like to say a few words about Soviet military operation. The Japanese government's acceptance of surrender did not end the war. You know that when the emperor accepted the surrender, then Truman ordered ceasefire on the troops. On the contrary, it is precisely the emperor's acceptance of surrender that triggered the Soviet military operation in Kuriles and Hokkaido, because Soviet Union thought that it is precipitous, but it's a profitable time to use that confusion, political confusion, to grab as much territory as possible using that the confusion. And so the Soviet Union launched the so-called Kuriles and Hokkaido operation, right? The Kuriles chain, all right? And if possible, they're going to take the half of Hokkaido, right? And Kuriles operation, compared with Manchuria operation, that's a totally unprepared, right? Very hastily implemented operation. And there's a last very major battle in the Pacific War. It's a battle of Shumshu, probably very little known battle in the northern part of the Kuriles Island. The Soviet invaded in Shumshu Island. It was supposed to, Soviet expected that they are going to take that island in one day. It lasted for 3 days. And the Japanese troops defending that fought very effectively. In fact, Japanese could have won the battle because the Soviets are not prepared. Soviet outmanned, right? And the Soviet won the war simply because the Japanese imperial headquarters were very anxious to surrender to the Allied forces and ordered Japanese forces to surrender to the Soviet. And so the Stalin wanted. Stalin was serious about Hokkaido, taking the northern half of Hokkaido, because that was controlled at the so-called Soya Strait, right? But it was he was opposed by Truman. Truman was adamantly opposed. Hokkaido is U.S. occupation land, and he was forced to give up. That means the cost of that the giving of Hokkaido is that all the Kuriles were given to the Soviets, including the southern parts of the Kuriles Islands. That was clearly Japanese territory, and then the Soviets, taking advantage of the situation, seized those southern part of Kuriles, which the Japanese called Northern Territories, and then this became a very important territorial issue that was still unresolved between Japanese government and the Russian government until today. And so here, the Soviets during this operation demanded, well, attempted to influence Japanese occupation. For instance, the Soviets demanded that the joint commandership on Allied Supreme Commander, not only MacArthur, but also Vasilevsky should be appointed joint commander. Well, the US flatly rejected this. This is our war. You have fought only a few days. You are not entitled to have the joint commandership. The Stalin demanded the occupation of the northern half of Hokkaido, and the US rejected, as I said, and then demanded the occupation zone in Tokyo, and the US rejected. Right? And so Soviet wanted to influence the Japanese occupation. Now, with a few minutes, I would like to say, to wrap up the conclusion for the last 3 lectures. First of all, I'd like to underscore the importance of international history. That is, in order to see the drama of the ending Pacific War, that you have to really take a look at all those international aspects. You cannot really rely on the US-centric view, an atomic bomb-centric view, that you have to see all the 3 dimensions, not only 3 dimensions, but also sometimes you have to include the role of Britain and the role of China. And so international history is very, very important. Secondly, I would like to emphasize the centrality of Soviet factor. And I already mentioned that Truman's decision to drop the bomb, the Soviet Union played a very important role. And the Japanese foreign policy, military policy, Soviet Union most occupied the most important place. And also here, as far as atomic bomb concerned, right? It is the assumption that Truman had only the atomic bombing was the only alternative that's available to Truman. That was a myth. And also that it is atomic bomb that ended the war. That's also a myth. If you take a look at Japanese the decision-making process that eventually accepted surrender, then that's, I think, the Soviet entry into the war had a far more important influence than the atomic bomb. Now, I would say Stalin's objective was from the very beginning, very clear. He was determined to obtain that strategic point, and he skillfully used diplomacy and the military operations to attain that objectives, and succeeded. And finally, that I would like to say, the tragedy of the Pacific War that had to be to end it with the atomic bomb and Soviet entry into the war. I think that what is the who is most responsible for this? I think that I would say the Japanese government, who delayed the surrender despite many opportunities that they had. If they had they surrendered earlier, they could have avoided the atomic bomb. They could have avoided the Soviet entry into the war. And so they are the ones to be blamed. It is therefore that it is, in my opinion, it's very unfortunate the Japanese still think, many Japanese think that we Japanese are also victims of World War II. We are the ones who suffer the atomic bombing. And our territories are taken, seized by the Soviet Union. But before they blame the Soviet Union, Japanese, they should blame their own government for delaying that surrender process. And I end here, and thank you very much for coming to 3 lectures, and then I am willing to entertain some questions for, I don't know how much time we have, but
20 minutes.
Okay, good. Thank you. Questions? Wow, it was, yeah.
So this is going back probably to the last lecture a little bit, but I'm still trying to get my head around why it was that the Japanese were so bent on having the Russians mediate their surrender. It seemed as though, because Russia was so clearly an enemy of Japan, and also as time went on towards the very end of the war, it seemed as though it was clear that Japan wasn't going to get another military victory. Why did they continue to try and get Russia to mediate?
Yeah, because that's true. Because I think that what I repeat what I say, because they are so hung up with preserving Kokutai, the emperor system, and there's absolutely no hope to negotiate with the United States as long as the United States stuck to this unconditional surrender, right? If it is unconditional surrender is a destruction of Kokutai, that's destruction of the emperor system, and what's going to happen with the emperor we don't know, right? And in that case, that we are going to fight to the war. The only way that the Japanese could really preserve at least some form of Kokutai and terminate war was to negotiate with the Soviet Union. And so that's their thinking. I absolutely I agree with you. That was in my opinion. I mean, there are certain people, very reasonable people, objected to this. Ambassador Sato, for instance, he raised objection to this. He just said that this is a pipe dream. You cannot possibly have Moscow mediate for us because there's no possibility. But those people, sometimes those people who work in Japan, they are so wrapped up with the domestic situation because they are facing the opposition from the military, right? And they are still trying to find out the way to bring military aboard for the termination of war, right? And what's the best way? Because you cannot accept Potsdam terms. And the only way, in fact, what peace parties wanted was to approach Moscow, right, and get some kind of terms, and come back with terms, say, for instance, the preservation of the imperial house. Right? This is the only thing, the best thing that we can get, and impose that decision on the military. That's the scenario that the Togo adhere to. And obviously, I think this is, in a retrospect, that's a major blunder that they relied on Moscow when the Moscow was really actually preparing for war against Japan. And that's why I said yesterday, this is really major blunder on the part of Japan. Japan substituted wishful thinking for strategic thinking. I don't know, did I answer your question? Yeah.
Thank
you. I know the talk has been focused on the end of the Pacific War, but I want to ask you something about the beginning of the Pacific War.
Okay.
When Japan is deciding whether to go on work on the U.S. or war on the Soviet Union, what did happen that they decided to go at work with the U.S. Because I guess the U.S. would be also fighting on two fronts, the same thing as the Soviet Union. What was the deciding point?
Well, this is the Japanese government was divided between those people who just advocated going north, attack Soviet Union first, and or attack go south, and particularly the Navy wanted to go south because of the resources, oil, and so on. This is in order for Japan to survive. Then I think this is very important to go to Southeast Asia and secure oil. And if you go to south, of course, you're going to attack the British, French, and then particularly British and Dutch, right? And interest, and then that would really alienate eventually the United States, right? And so eventually, what happened with the Japanese government, the Southern, that prevailed, Southern faction, because I think that we are going to wage war against the United States allies, Western allies. And I think that's talking about strategic blunder. I think that was a real blunder in many ways, because I think some people thought that waging war against the United States are foolhardy, because the United States economic industrial power is so enormous that the Japanese would never win the war. And then and the person who was the most thought that way was Admiral Yamamoto. I don't know if you know Yamamoto. Yamamoto is Hirohito. I don't know. This is a really brilliant military strategist who engineered the Pearl Harbor attack. And he thought all the Japanese could do is just to win a few battles in the beginning and then sue for peace, right? But now that Japanese got into quagmire and could not get out, and then so this is the way that the Japanese decision makers made a decision to go south rather than north. But that does not mean the Japanese government totally abandoned the intention to attack the Soviet Union. They always left that option of attacking the Soviet Union open, and just simply that you have to wait until the right persimmon falls on the ground. It's not precipitous time that we wait until that's let's wait how the Germans would do, right? And the Germans were just about to win the war, then we're going to attack the Soviet Union, right? And so that's the way. And therefore, that even after the war began, the Pacific War began, and after Pearl Harbor, the Japanese military mobilized and reinforced the forces in Guantanamo against the along that the Soviet border, just in case that something might happen. And so, did I answer your question? Yeah. Let's see. Any other?
I have a very trivial question. Once
okay.
I am almost embarrassed to ask, but it's still intriguing me. That is, why did Truman go to Potsdam by boat? Because this was a very tense period. He was waiting for the results of the first testing of the atomic bomb. There was a very complex situation. And then he took 6 days to make a boat trip to Potsdam. Why didn't he fly? Any clue?
I don't know why he flew. He did not fly. You know, Stimson flew. Stimson flew to first England, and then and so why he did not fly, I don't know. Maybe he liked boat. It's a. How long did it take? I don't know. From
6 days.
6
In
days.
your book.
Yeah. And 6 days. You know what? 6 days of maybe necessary for Truman to study, and then he had a very intensive study session with Burns and others. Read all the Potsdam notes, and then sort of familiarized. I mean, he was scared. He was scared to go to Boston because, after all, he was suddenly thrust into this world arena, and my gosh, I'm going to deal with Stalin and then Churchill. I don't know if I'm up to it. And he was, and so that I don't know why he decided to take the boat. I don't know.
Then in your book, you also seem to suggest, without really saying it, that Truman was in fact a weak leader.
Weak leader, yes.
Hesitating, quite unpredictable. Is that your opinion?
That's my opinion of Truman. Is that yes, he was fully aware of his deficiencies. Before he went to Potsdam, he expressed his fear to his wife. I don't know if I'm up to this. I'm afraid. That's the part of the reason why he tried to inject, to show his forcefulness in a way. But all those people who watched Truman during the Potsdam conference agree that Truman's confidence grew as the conference proceeded. Particularly, he was very, very confident. He became very confident and forceful after he received the news that the United States succeeded in an atomic bomb test. That's everybody agrees. But instead of talking about trivia questions, Stalin was an amazing diplomat. Stalin was dealing with Churchill and Truman, and then citing all those details, the number of ships, and all those things, and the geographic details, where the river flows and those things, without notes. He has the whole things in his mind, and he was a very, very amazing diplomat.
The other man on which you seem to carry a very different judgment is Hirohito, because reading your book in the end, Hirohito is the crucial man in bringing about surrender.
Oh,
is that controversial in Japanese historiography, or are you alone in re-evaluating Hirohito's role as, after all, a wise man?
I am glad that you asked that question. I think Hirohito was indeed crucial in a Japanese decision to surrender. And without Hirohito's intervention, probably Japanese would not have surrendered. They could not have come to the conclusion, because two crucial imperial conferences and sort of two sacred decisions. I think that's a very, very, very important reason why that Japanese managed to surrender. However, Japanese historiography, many Japanese historians actually do not touch on that emperor, because this is emperor issue is a very taboo. And the reason why he made that so-called sacred decision is, Japanese historians tend to portray emperor's self-sacrifice. Emperor rescued the Japanese lives by making that difficult decision, self-sacrificing, and they repeated this sentence that, I don't care what's going to happen to me, but I'm going to save Japan and Japanese, my subject. I think that's, I challenge that view. Emperors was concerned about the preservation of imperial house. At least he was the head of this imperial house. He was really concerned about this tradition, right? First of all. And second, he was concerned about his own safety and his family's safety. I mean, he was... And so that when you talk about his motivation, he didn't care very much about the Japanese subject. My gosh, if he cared about Japanese subject, lives of Japanese people who were sacrificed, then he should have cared about incendiary bombs. That total sacrifice of Japanese, people who were sacrificed, that more people died of incendiary bombs than atomic bombs, right? And when the Japanese people, Japanese houses are bombed, Japanese people are bombed, what's the emperor concerned about? Concerned about that if the American forces invade in Japan, we will not be able to preserve the three very important imperial treasures that are symbol of Japanese imperial house. That's the way that he thought about it. And I challenged this. And then, to preserve the imperial house, that's for his safety, he was willing to sacrifice Japanese military, which was, up then, it was just symbiotic relationship with the emperor, right? And so that I would say that, and then talk about his imperial rescript of the of surrender, or I'm sorry, that at the end of the war, he did not use the term surrender. He did not use the defeat. It's the end of the war, right? And talking about this, his responsibility, he was in many ways, he was not supposed to intervene in a real Japanese real decision making, but he was cheering, for instance, Okinawa. He was cheering that we have to score one more victory so that we can end the war. He was a fighting commander-in-chief, fighting generalissimo. And in my opinion, I think he was responsible in many ways. And I am not sure that if it is a good idea, for the occupation forces to bring the emperor to trial. Probably, I think this is not necessary. But at least, the least that he could do, he should have done, is to advocate for the responsibility. After all, millions of Japanese soldiers died in the battle, shouting that long live the emperor. What was his sense of responsibility? That's what I argue, but this part of my my book was not really commented on because Japanese do not like to touch on this issue because still I think that the emperor is a very taboo issue. What I said is translated into the Japanese press, probably I think I will be welcomed by the right-wing ultra-nationalists in Japan. Probably I think I'll be very viciously attacked. But you know, that's the way I feel, and therefore that I think that my book, I think in that sense, I think is a very important one. And I'm just sort of provocateur. I just wanted to have a debate on the Japanese historians, and then nobody took my bait, and so I'm kind of disappointed on that score.
Thank you. Monday, when introducing you, I mentioned that we wanted to honor your scholarship and your courage. And of course, we haven't been disappointed by the extent of your scholarship and by your courage, just measuring the fierce reactions we got after your first lecture Monday. But what we did not know when inviting you was whether you would be a good teacher. And now, after 4 classes, I think we are all delighted by the sheer generosity with which you took us on this journey and taught us, I think, all of us, a tremendous lot on different perspectives, American, Japanese, and Soviet. So 3 new worlds went open, but probably more interesting still, we saw how these 3 worlds interacted. And so thank you very much for these 4 lectures in the name of all of us.
I'd like to thank you all for coming to my lectures. Thank you very much. Thank you.